Wonderful. All righty. Are we full screen? Can everybody see? Excellent. All righty, Leah, the mic is yours.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for registering and joining us today. We are excited for this CHEBNA webinar. I'm seeing that folks are still joining the webinar, and we will give everyone a few more seconds to get settled. I'll be right back with you.
Yeah, we're looking great. I think folks are making their way into the space. We're now at 175. Let's go ahead and take the dance, Leah.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for joining us today for this very important webinar, which we have titled COVID-19 Resources, Responses, and Updates. My name is Leah Jarnagin, and I serve as the Interim System-Wide Director of Student Wellness and Basic Needs Initiative. This webinar is brought to you today by the California Higher Education Basic Needs Alliance, or CHEBNA, which is comprised of leaders from the California Community Colleges, California State University, and the University of California. Each of the three segments is committed to addressing all students have the opportunity to be accessible. To that end, CHEBNA serves as an intersegmental collaboration focused on identifying and sharing resources for addressing students' basic needs. We thank you again for joining us, and we want you to know that we are recording this webinar and will make it available online. We will also share the recorded webinar with all who registered. We are so grateful today to be joined by fantastic colleagues who continue to do terrific work on behalf of all of our students. Today, we will learn from Crystal Martinez, Director for Education at the UC Office of the President, Debbie Cochrane, Executive Vice President at the Institute for College Access and Success, also referred to as TICAS, Jessica Bartholow, Policy Advocate at the Western Center on Law and Poverty, Andrew Cheyne, Director of Government Affairs at the California Association of Food Banks, Shahera Hyatt, Director of the California Homeless Youth Project, and Jessica Smith, Senior Specialist for Equity Programs at the Foundation for Community Colleges. Thank you all so much for sharing your expertise with everyone on the webinar today. I am now going to pass the mic to my colleague, Ruben Canedo, so that he can share a little more about today's topics and our webinar format. Ruben.
Thank you so much for that, Leah. Thank you all so much for being here with us. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have us together here as a CHEBNA community. For those of you all that may have not heard of CHEBNA itself, it stands for the California Higher Ed Basic Needs Alliance. Today, we're going to do a little bit of a community centering, who's in the space here with us. Each speaker is then going to have 5 minutes to move through the content that was requested by the larger community. We're also going to feature a new resource guide by popular demand. A lot of folks kept asking for, can we have a centralized location where we're going to keep our community up to date with major national and state shaping efforts? And then we're going to transition to a Q&A session that's going to be facilitated by our phenomenal Colleen from the Community College Village. And we'll do a gratitude and wrap up. So in terms of who our goal is for today, or what our goal is for today, is to really make it one of the best days of the year. It's been an epic year, and we want to make sure that this nourishes your mind, your heart, your body, your soul, to let you all know and affirm that you're not alone, and we're all going to move through this experience together. So who's in here today? 100% representation of our community college, CSU, UC, and community partners that might be from the state of California or nationwide. Thank you all so much for dedicating quality time with us. I know in this moment where there's so much abundance happening, every second counts more than they used to. So the fact that you're here with us, we have all love and gratitude for you each. We also asked you at the registration, what was your role? So we have staff represented, administrators, and these are administrators in the higher ed context. This might be middle managers, executive leadership. We have faculty, we have folks outside of those roles. We might have some secret agents and some like superheroes and sheroes in this space. We don't know who you are, but you said others. Shout out to you for keeping yourself on the low. We have undergraduate students and graduate students as well. So thank you all so much for being here. Special shout out to our students that are going through like finals right now, or maybe midterms, or just trying to survive, and yet they're making time to be here in the space with y'all. We're all here for you and with you. These are some of the roles that we are representative of. We have folks who are coordinators, directors, we have associate directors, assistant deans, executive directors, so on and so forth. So we are a vast and holistic community that is responsible for the basic needs of our community in different roles and in different ways. Now, one of the questions that we asked you as you checked in is, what's one word that describes how this COVID-19 moment has been for you? The top 3 responses have been, were challenging, uncertainty, and busy. But there's also other conversations here that you all have offered, but it helps for you all to feel that you haven't been alone in the way that you have been experiencing this moment. And we couldn't just talk about the challenge. We also were curious about what self-care practices have you been using? And we have the self-care practices that were most common in the space is to go for a walk or a jog or a run in your community or elsewhere. The second one is to share quality time with your family. Shout out to you all for making quality time with your family, however that has been. And then meditation. So inviting folks to make sure that we are meeting this moment with some intentional self-care practices. We must always move at the pace of our wellness and our values in harmonic convergence. So with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and check my mic and invite our phenomenal Crystal Martinez, who is out at UC DC, that is going to update us at the federal level. So take it away, Crystal.
Hi, good evening from Washington, D.C. I'm UC's Director of Federal Education Policy. I oversee the advocacy on behalf of the 10-campus university system when it comes to funding for education programs. So many of the things that I oversee fall under the Higher Education Act. So under that would encompass basic needs. And that has been a big push from my office for the last couple of years in partnership with Ruben and his team. So I'm going to go over a little bit about what has happened at the federal level in relation to COVID-19 and the response. The first package was passed in March. It approved $8.3 billion in emergency funding. Most of that money went to National Institutes of Health, HHS, the CDC, NIAID, BARDA. These are all the agencies that are in charge of developing medical countermeasures to help fight against COVID-19, but also the testing, the ramp up of all of the things that are involved in the health enterprise, including with working with hospitals across the country, including the 5 major medical centers that the UC system has across the state. Also in March, HR 6203 was passed, and that provided $1 billion for social service emergency funds. In this particular bill, a lot of the things that we needed for them to do in Medicare, Medicaid reimbursements were done because we had to pivot a lot of our hospital beds to be ready for COVID-19 patients. We were losing a lot of the typical revenue that comes into hospitals that I think you all have heard of. Since then, also in this particular package, USDA had waived the work requirements for SNAP benefits under that package. The third package, which I think most of you are most familiar with, was the CARES Act, and that passed at the end of March. That particular package provided $2 trillion in funding, and a huge chunk of it went to K-12 and higher ed. It approximately provided about $13.5 billion for K-12 education and close to $14 billion for higher education. California received a huge chunk of that because of the way the formula worked. UC was provided with $260 million for across the 10 campuses. CSU was provided they were provided with $525 million across their campuses, and the community colleges received $580 million across the community colleges. For each of those pots of funding, it had to be split equally down the middle, and I think my colleague from TICAS will go into that a little bit further. I have been following a lot of the rules and regulations that have come from the Department of Ed and the guidance in helping our system develop spending plans across. And I'm happy to say that across our 10 campuses, the money has started to go out to individual students. There have been minor hiccups along the way, and we've been trying to navigate those. The latest thing that we figured out is that the IRS is not going to count this as taxable income, which is great. And the latest update I have, Ruben, you could go into the next slide. And this gives you the campus breakdowns in case you're interested, and it has the allocations per campus, and then the second column with minimum financial aid, that's the direct student aid payment, so it's half of the larger pot. And the latest intel I have is that the House is currently working on a CARES 2.0, which would be the 5th stimulus package to come before Congress, and it's originating in the House. And currently the price tag is $3 trillion. Approximately $1 trillion of that is expected to go to state and local localities as a direct appropriation because of all the falling revenues across the country. We expect to see more money going into the Education Stabilization Fund. I haven't been able to assess how much that's going to look like because I think they're trying to bring the price tag down from $3 trillion, so I'm not sure where we're going to land in the education accounts. We will likely see some language at the end of Wednesday, maybe at the earliest. Congress has to give their members at least 72 hours to come back to DC. So at the very earliest, we'll see a vote sometime on Friday, but I think that's going to get pushed into next week because there's still ongoing discussions if they can do remote voting and markups remotely. But I do know that the appropriation side of this seems pretty wrapped up. It's the authorization side that's taking a little bit longer. So that's why we're not going to see language until maybe Wednesday evening or even early Thursday. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Crystal. Appreciate you. And just a quick clarification. Can you confirm if there was actual waiving of SNAP requirements when you mentioned SNAP in the previous slide?
Yes, for the work requirements, they put those on hold and they allowed for states to apply for waivers for like pandemic benefits.
Beautiful. Thank you for that clarification. And thank you so much for being here with us, Crystal, especially in the time difference of West Coast to East Coast. Thank you for that. So sure. Now passing the mic over to Debbie, and thank you all so much who are here with us in our webinar. Your questions are coming in. We are holding all of those questions and we're gonna be able to respond to those, if not in today's webinar, in the resource guide that we're gonna feature near the end of the webinar today. The mic is yours, Debbie.
Great. Thank you so much, Ruben, and thank you everyone for joining us and for having me here with you. So I will just say a little bit more about the Federal CARES Act. I know Crystal said some of the key facts already, talked about what it meant for the University of California system in particular. But what I have here on this slide is a pie chart showing the emergency aid portion of the CARES Act dollars for California institutions. So again, the CARES Act allocated money direct to institutions, half of which was earmarked for emergency aid. Colleges could be spending more than these amounts on emergency aid if they chose to, but this is the minimum required for them to spend. And this just gives you a bit of a sense of the scale of those dollars and where they're going. There's been guidance that has been coming out pretty frequently from the Department of Education about the dollars and how they can be spent. Two points I would like to make about that so far. One, unfortunately, the Education Department has declared that to be eligible for these grants, students must otherwise be eligible for federal aid. That excludes a number of groups of students, but most notably, I would say it excludes undocumented students from being able to benefit from the grant. So that is a big oversight for students from California as well as many other states. The second piece, I would say, one of the more recent pieces of guidance is that colleges are all required to post on their website information about the availability of these grants and how they're making decisions about allocating them. Who will get the grants and how much will they get if they're eligible for an award. So the timeline is about now when colleges are supposed to be posting this information online. So, you know, if you haven't gotten that information up and you're at a college, something to pay attention to. And if you're working with students and want to know how colleges are proceeding along these lines, feel free to ask. Now's the time. Also wanted to talk a little bit about borrower protections. I think most on this call are probably most focused on current college students who, even if they're student loan borrowers, are probably not needing to take out, they're not needing to make payments on their student loans. But for any of the students who have left college already, and are having to make payments, including maybe some of you on this call. What's important to know is that the CARES Act actually put a pause on required federal student loan payments for most federal student loan borrowers until October 1st, 2020. That pause is interest-free. It's a type of what's called a forbearance. Usually during forbearance periods when borrowers are not making payments on their loans, interest is accruing. But on this special forbearance, they are interest-free until October. And also if there's any defaulted loan activity and collections activity that's happening there, whether through wage garnishment or other paths, those are also put on hold for 60 days. You can go to the next slide, please. So in the California state policy landscape, just a moment of history here, there has been increasing recognition over several years now about the role that financial aid plays in students being able to access college and succeed in college. And a large part of that is greater recognition of the need for students to cover costs related to basic needs. So I think as a growing recognition of those challenges that students are facing in California, we have seen 6 consecutive budget years with increases to need-based financial aid. So it's a pretty astonishing track record for the state of California, and so much so that there has been a lot of focus on reforming financial aid to spend more, but also make sure what we're spending is as targeted as possible to support students' access and success. Now these conversations are on hold. You know, whereas back in the beginning of March, we were thinking about how to talk about investing $1 billion more in financial aid. As folks on this call have surely heard, we're now dealing with a $54 billion deficit. So again, those are on hold. However, there's still targeted financial aid policy reform that the state needs to be pursuing. Reforms that can help students stay afloat and on track while they're trying to get through the crisis. Many of these provisions that we and a few dozen of our partners have been promoting and are working on currently are mirrored in the Federal CARES Act. The Federal CARES Act tells students who had to withdraw because of coronavirus that they don't have to repay any financial aid that they received, even if they had to withdraw and otherwise would have. We want to see those provisions mirrored in California law. For students where their academic progress is a big factor in whether they're eligible for financial aid or whether they can continue receiving financial aid, we want to make sure pass-fail grading systems don't thwart their ability to pay for college. So we're working on those quite actively right now. Again, $54 billion deficit. I think it's fair to say that our track record of 6 years of consecutive new financial aid investments is probably coming to an end this year, and we may be, you know, having some much more difficult conversations around where dollars are spent in the coming weeks. That said, we are very much trying to make the case for where targeted financial aid investments could best be spent to help, you know, support students who are unserved or underserved by existing federal and state financial aid resources. For us at TICAS, the group that stands at the top of that is undocumented students, given how the Department of Education has excluded them from CARES funding and how underserved they are from existing financial aid programs.
Thank you so much for that, Debbie, and thank you for being here with us. I know that folks are fighting for your time and energy, so we're honored to have you here with us. So with that, we're going to go ahead and pass the mic to Jessica Bartholow.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. It's really great to be part of the team. I just want to spend a second and just kind of remind you that I come to you as somebody who has experienced hunger and homelessness as a college student. And so if that's you, and this is what you're going through right now, hang in there. It's just go day by day. And if you're somebody who's been there before, and this is really hard to watch people go through hunger, having gone through it yourself, I just want to say, me too. And let's get through it together. It is really harrowing to see how many people are going without their basic needs right now, and how hard everybody's working to prevent that from happening. And yet here we are. Okay, with that, let me go ahead and pursue through my screens. So I just want to kind of do an overview of where we're at in California. Some really broad issues here, making sure that everybody knows that the California courts took action with Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice, Sakui. She has led in making sure that evictions are not allowed during the COVID emergency. So please, if you do get an eviction notice, please know that you cannot be evicted, and legal services can help you to prevent that if there's eviction notice on your doorstep. Also, we know that that doesn't help all the college students who are trying not to get, who have a piling up rent and trying to get out of their rent or lease because their college closed, they have no job. And so I just want to point out that a letter has been sent, and there's a link to that letter, to Gavin Newsom to ask him to please help college students to find relief in their rent or lease agreements. And that's being led by Young Invincibles. I also want to point out, you heard about the relief for student loans, but oftentimes low-income students have other types of debt as well. Controller Betty Yee and Gavin Newsom have both put suspensions on debt collection for the most part. Betty Yee has said we will not collect any debt through the FTB. Gavin Newsom have said all forms of COVID relief are to be safe from collections, and that includes the money coming for students and from the IRS or from unemployment. So please make sure that your money in the bank account, your money in any remaining paychecks you might have, it's supposed to be protected from debt collection. On the cash aid and food stamp side, CalFresh side, I'm going to go through these in detail in a second, some of the CalFresh parts, but for CalWorks, because we know that about 30% of our college students are in larger families that may have children, and if you're relying on CalWorks or having to turn to it for the first time, this is our basic needs grant for low-income families with children, and there is a suspension of the welfare to work rules as well as in-person reporting requirements. We also and there's also a new provision that's called it allows you to go in and ask for help rather than getting a monthly grant, just getting a basic benefit that will prevent you from having to from participating in the program in the future. So it's called it's like a deferral. You can get like a grant if you need it to pay your rent or something like that. The CalFresh program is also implementing emergency allotments, which I'll talk about, and pandemic EBT, as well as putting a pause on some of the other rules that were in play. There is a presumptive Medi-Cal eligibility. Some of you maybe have lost your employment-based healthcare or some other form of healthcare. So make sure that you know that COVID-related testing and services are available to everybody in the state of California with presumptive eligibility. I have a link there. There's money for people who are undocumented immigrants if they are not eligible for, because they're not eligible for the other COVID relief. Many people working have lost jobs or lost income, and so there's specific relief, and there's a link. It hasn't been announced how people can apply necessarily. There are some local funds like Los Angeles County. There's also something called UndocuFunds in San Francisco area. So take a look at what might be out there already for you, and know that the state of California will also have some funds coming up. Next screen, please. Great, and I talked about the CalFresh pandemic EBT. This is actually, I should be clear, this is not a CalFresh benefit. And Let me just say that right out. It's pandemic EBT is outside of CalFresh. It is a food benefit, but the food benefit is for children, and for children specifically to replace their school meals that they missed during the school year when the school closed down. Many schools are offering grab-and-go lunches, but those grab-and-go lunches aren't always available at every school and are difficult for people with limited mobility or a sick person at home, etc., to get to. And so the pandemic EBT was authorized by the Family First Act, and it allows everybody whose child receives a meal in the school setting to receive a pandemic EBT card. This is a black and white card that will be mailed directly to those families that receive SNAP or Medi-Cal. It will not be on a regular EBT card. It is not a CalFresh benefit. It's a food benefit that's to replace school meals. It is not considered a public charge, so if you're worried about immigration status, nutrition assistance to children is not considered a public charge. And this benefit, if it does not come to you in the mail, it's because your child does not receive CalFresh or CalWorks or Medi-Cal, in which case they will need to apply separately. There's a website where you can go and you can apply between May 22nd and June 30th to receive the pandemic EBT benefit. Finally, additionally, those people who do receive CalFresh are eligible for emergency allotments. In April, on the 12th, and just yesterday, CalFresh recipients received an additional allotment. This benefit was only available for people who did not receive the maximum benefit already for their household size. Those people actually got no benefit. And if that's you, we want to hear from you. Western Center on Law and Poverty is looking to turn to the federal government. We have asked them to please correctly apply the federal law and provide an additional allotment to people who got the maximum benefit. We believe the federal government inappropriately denied you assistance. So please give us a call. Otherwise, if that is you that received benefits on April 12th and May 10th, you'll receive another benefit again in June. So look out for that additional help. If you need, we have flyers that were put together by Western Center, CAFB, CFPA, and CWDA in English, Spanish, and Chinese. Next slide. Finally, I just want to tell you specifically about the student rules in the SNAP program. Know that we have been ongoingly trying to change the rules at the federal level because these rules deny students aid if they're out of work and not complying with one of the other exemptions available in the federal law. The Federal EATS Act, authored by Jimmy Gomez and 100 other of his best friends in Congress. This is an act that would permanently change that rule. It is still pending. In the meantime, the Emergency EATS Act and the End Pandemic Hunger for College Students Act have been introduced and would both take care of that situation for California. We did ask the federal government to relieve us of this rule temporarily, as did other states, and they said no. So that's why we need a law change. I just wanted to point that out. They had an opportunity to do the right thing and they didn't. And we're really appreciative of the members of Congress who are leading in those requests. Finally, the other SNAP policies. You did hear Crystal mention that that there's a temporary reprieval of the ABOD time limit. This time limit, there was a pending rule which would have dramatically changed and increased how many people were subject to that time limit. Here in California, many, many more people in about 30 counties across the state would be impacted, including students who are half-time or less, or students newly leaving college. There's a national injunction in the court case, DC versus USDA, and also the Family First Act put a pause and said no state can apply this unless they've got some other employment and training requirement that's not being met. In California, the rule is completely put aside for all counties, all people, until the pandemic ends and or the DC injunction is removed. The case moves on though, and we are hopeful that we will win in that case. Finally, categorical eligibility rule. This is a rule that would change the asset test and the gross income test for the CalFresh program and the SNAP program nationally. It is pending, and based on the USDA's
we may have lost Jesby's camera or internet. So we're gonna go ahead and move right along, fam. Grateful that she made it through the last offering, but we're just adapting, intentional adaptation and flowing with that. That was not supposed to happen. We're doing it to see if you're actually paying attention. Surprise, gotcha, and let's move on. So checking the mic and passing it over to Brother Andrew. Take it away, brother.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I think just to try and finish Jessica's thought, that we do expect the federal government to continue with rulemaking to cut our programs, as hard as that is to believe, including that categorical eligibility rule, except that thankfully Congress, it's been one of our top asks to put in language that would similarly put it on hold, just like cuts to the time limit. So thanks to everyone for tracking all of that. There's so much going on in the CalFresh space. I just wanted to quickly say thank you to the entire community for having me on, for lifting up the food bank perspective in this. And in case you don't work in this particular aspect of basic needs, or you haven't heard it already, food banks are really proud of their work in this space. They're very excited about it. And at the same time, a lot of them are also really humble. They know that it's an area where they're still learning. There's still more work to be done. But just know that it's a very important area for all of us at the association and across the network of food banks. You know, folks know that just like serving other challenging populations like farm workers or others, to really feed students, it needs to happen on nights, at weekends, and other ways, and to make sure that that need is really being met. And just to give one example about how we're all trying to learn and continue to be better partners, we had space in our annual meeting of the food banks, just spotlighting higher education issues, some best practices, some lesson learned, some challenges ahead. And I know that the community on our side would be really interested in continuing that dialogue. So thanks for having me today. As far as COVID goes, just to, again, continue the thread from Jessica, no one knows better than food banks that CalFresh delivers 9 meals for every one by food banks. And unfortunately, that's really being shown now while we're waiting for larger, more impactful investments on CalFresh from Congress. That's obviously our top ask when it comes to future COVID legislation. And as you can see in the image, and you've probably seen some of the pictures and videos online, the lines are just longer than ever. California food banks are seeing about a 73% surge on average across the state. And that's even higher than the national average, which is 70%. And in some cases, it's even more. But food banks didn't get bigger overnight. And so at the same time that there's this surge in need for food, there's been, especially because this is a health pandemic, so many volunteers, older adults, and even university groups, right, aren't volunteering at this time. Many local pantries have closed. And that may have happened on higher ed campuses, depending on, you know, what resources are available or what the rules are on that institution's campus right now. And so obviously I don't want to go into any specifics, but I'd be happy to take any questions or concerns about that. Certainly it's a challenging time. And so I would just ask, if that's happening, you know, please try and be patient with your food bank. I know they're trying to work on this. And again, they're seeing higher costs and fewer resources, you know, at the same time. And so they're really feeling squeezed. And so, you know, just please be patient if there are any issues in the field. And hopefully out of this comes more partnerships, more innovation. And certainly food banks are really preparing for the long haul. I'm sure you all are tracking this as well as I am, but with those unemployment figures as high as they are and the insurance claims as high as they are, even feeding America's worst case models for how bad food insecurity was going to get, they're having to rewrite them already because the unemployment data and poverty data that underlie those food insecurity models are already, they're too low. They're already out of date, even from the worst that they were projecting. And so we appreciate this larger community really tracking what's needed to address basic needs. As far as federal aid goes, go back please, sorry, just really quick. As far as federal aid goes, I just want people to know that a lot of the assistance that food banks are supposed to get has not hit yet. The Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, Those foods won't happen until July, even though Families First Act was in March with an effective date of April 1st. So there really is this long gap, and we're really trying to press the state for additional resources during this time. So if there's any resource issues, happy to try and work together on that. And then if anyone on this webinar is in need of food or knows someone who is, please use this link to try and find your local food bank. You can put in your zip code and get connected with local resources. Otherwise, on the next slide, I've got more contact information. So I appreciate that Jessica went over all of the policy changes that are happening to CalFresh. Again, as the emergency food providers, working with pantries on campuses and other locations, we want to make sure that folks aren't just getting fed today, but really getting that ongoing resource connected to CalFresh, WIC, or any other federal funding that they're entitled to. But in this time, it is challenging. And so just as a lot of schools have gone to remote and distance situations, so too does the outreach and application assistance for CalFresh. So you're seeing an image from Second Harvest of Santa Cruz, where they're doing a Facebook ad to try and get the word out, and also asking people to interact online and over the phone. We know that phone time and data costs and plans don't always cover those minutes, etc. So we're doing the best we can. But you've got my email over there. You've got Stephanie's. CAFB through Stephanie Nishio has more than 50 partners all across the state trying to do CalFresh outreach. Obviously, a lot of the best practices that we were doing, some of the super clinics, et cetera, going on campuses, trying to meet students where they're at, is really challenging right now. So we're open to your good ideas on what kind of partnerships are most effective. Again, people should be calling 211 if they need food. Again, you can get connected not just to the food bank, but to Meals on Wheels or whatever is appropriate for that household. So we encourage people to call 211 or go online to getcalfresh.org, where they've got a simple interface to submit an application to your local county. And we've got some additional resources from our organization. And if you go to that CalFresh outreach page, that has specific information that we've done on students, some of which in collaboration with people in this community. And we really appreciate you informing us and keeping us straight on what's needed for higher education. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here with us, brother. Thank you and the whole community that has been really at the forefront of all these conversations. You are one of the most requested speakers. Folks just admire and love all of the support that you all have been showing up for college students and continue to show and continuously lift the college student community through all of your social media posts and advocacy efforts. So thank you all so much. I'm gonna go ahead and pass the mic now to our next speaker, which is Shahera. The mic is all yours.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Shahera Hyatt, Director of the California Homeless Youth Project, and I'm just going to be presenting a little bit around housing and homelessness. So in February 2020, we published a resource guide on emergency housing, food, and financial resources for undergraduates at California's public colleges and universities to really make these resources more accessible to students and the people that are working most directly with students. And I saw in one of the graphics at the beginning of this webinar that there are homeless liaisons on this call, foster youth liaisons, other people working in basic needs, and just appreciate you and all the hard work that you're doing right now. So this guide looked at campus resources on all UCs, all CSUs, and 50 community colleges, and includes links to the websites so students and staff can learn more about the resources that are available for those with basic needs and securities. So we looked at housing resources, including emergency housing that's provided on campus or by the campus. We looked at programs serving students either experiencing homelessness or those in foster care. Looked at food resources like grocery distribution and free hot meals through campuses. I know that some of these resources might not be active right now, but it's probably worth looking at this resource guide to see to just follow those channels to see what is available right now. Are there updates on the websites or contact information of the person that has the most recent and local information about what's happening as a workaround during coronavirus? We also looked at emergency financial resources, so including emergency grants for all students. These are things that you typically do not have to pay back. Obviously, so many students and so many people are in economic crisis right now. if there is funding available to them, making that funding as immediately available to them as possible can just help reduce some of the harm that's being inflicted during this time. Some also have short-term loans for students, which sometimes do need to be paid back. That can be a little bit trickier for students that are in financial crises. And then at certain schools, there's aid for specific student groups, like some folks have talked about undocumented students or parenting students or other student communities that might be more disproportionately impacted by basic needs crises, and especially right now. So that's the link to this report. And then it's also going to be in the resource guide that Jessica's going to talk about in just a moment. You can go to the next slide. So a lot of national organizations like the National Network for Youth or the National Alliance to End Homelessness are compiling resources around homelessness and COVID-19. This first bullet will be a live link after when this presentation is made available to you all. And that includes resources on helping youth, young adults access the recovery rebate specifically for young people experiencing homelessness or who might not have a permanent address. I know I've gotten a lot of questions around that. They also have office hours around federal funding and policy updates around homelessness and COVID-19 in particular. As a local resource, Andrew mentioned 211. The same is true around housing and homelessness issues, that 211 is going to be a really good first point of contact if you or students that you're working with are having a housing crisis. We know Governor Newsom released about $150 million in state funding to address coronavirus, COVID-19, and homelessness. And so money is being made available through our continuums of care, which are these regional bodies that allocate state and federal funding on homelessness to direct programs. So getting in touch with your continuum of care might be one way to find out how is that money being spent in your community. You probably heard that in some communities, there's efforts to try to get folks into hotels or motels. That state program is called Project Room Key. I think it's not happening as fast as possible. There are limitations on it. Sometimes it's only being used for folks with kind of pre-existing conditions or who have already gotten coronavirus. I would argue that we should be using it more proactively and preventatively because there are so many folks that are unsheltered or in precarious housing situations that aren't able to shelter in place. And even the language that we use, right? Stay home, shelter in place, you know, how does that impact people that do not have a home to exist in and a place to be safe or to practice their hygiene needs? So this is a really good opportunity for advocacy. And I think especially around homelessness, a lot of times, quite frankly, people can be really apathetic to the needs of people experiencing homelessness. And I think right now, as we see that so many unsheltered folks are still left on the streets, it's especially hard to ignore the needs of this community. So grassroots coalitions are forming. Services, not sweeps, is something that exists. I know in many communities across our state that are really encouraging law enforcement not to ask people to move along, that there's nowhere to move along to, and that shelters, which is like congregate care, is not necessarily really safe during a pandemic and could be exposing people to greater risk levels. And we've seen that like in San Francisco, where I think 100 people, you know, got coronavirus in a shelter. And yeah, we know that we need to be doing physical distancing and that the infrastructure around housing and homelessness has not been there for quite some time. And this pandemic is really shining a bright spotlight on that. So I would just encourage folks to be signing on to letters, whether that's local in your community, state level, federal, because the only way things are going to change around housing and homelessness is if people of all walks of life and economic strata speak out about this crisis and use our voices to really stand with our unhoused neighbors who are also constituents, who also have you know, all the same needs that we do. So some specifics around that, you know, folks need hygiene stations to be able to wash their hands. They need to have their tents and not be confiscated so that they can engage in physical distancing, you know, portable restrooms. All these kinds of things are basic public health strategies. And we don't always do, right, what's best for this community. So this is a really good time to speak up and use our voices. And I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Sharon. And again, thank you so much for the commitment that you have shown for the last couple of years to really lift college students amidst the abundance of work and responsibilities that you all have, to see publications become more and more formalized, and for your voice to be more and more dedicated to the college student population amidst all of the other populations that you are responsible for, has been truly uplifting and affirming for so many of our community members. So deeply appreciate you. I'm gonna go ahead and now transition us to the next portion of our conversation. I wanna just get everybody ready. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass the screen sharing responsibilities to our other Jessica Smith, who's gonna move you all through our brand new resource guide that we've been working on, and that will be an emergent space. We're gonna do our best to keep everybody up to date. So I'm stopping my sharing and handing over the stopping ability to Jessica.
All right, I think I have my screen shared. Can you all see that? Okay, cool. Thank you, Ruben, and thank you to all of the panelists that we've had so far, and to all the participants for joining us this afternoon. I want to share our resource document that we've been working on for the past few weeks. And this link to this resource document will be shared out. In fact, if anyone, Ruben, or if somebody has the capacity to share the link to the participants right now, I think that'd be great. But if not, it will be sent out in the email as soon as this recording is sent out, and y'all will be able to access it pretty shortly. So I don't want to take up too much time because I'd like to save our time for our Q&A. So real quickly, I'll just give a real brief overview. This document is going to serve as sort of a jumping off point for future resources that we've collected on a statewide level through our CHEBNA networks. This one specifically, of course, obviously is for COVID-19 response. And so at the top here, you'll have your table of contents, and you'll be able to just click on each of these sections and it will jump down to the portion that you're trying to get to, or you can use the table of contents on the left-hand side if that's what you prefer. So we do have some federal updates and resources, and some of these federal updates are what have already been shared from either Crystal or Debbie this afternoon. Like I said, I'm moving quickly, I apologize, but I want to save room for our Q&A. Then we have some statewide resources and updates, and a lot in here about some student resources that are applicable more or less to all students regardless of which system they're from. And some great resources that have already been shared from Andrew and Jess B about food resources, pandemic EBT, different updates to CalFresh. One thing that I did want to point out, and I know one of our participants already shared this, is you can use CalFresh benefits now to purchase groceries online through Walmart and Amazon. So we want to make sure we're sharing that with our students and their families, especially those who have transportation or other types of barriers, and this is a really big deal. There's a food bank finder, there's all sorts of great resources here that are considered statewide resources, some unemployment and financial resources, health and mental health resources. And then when you move down through the document, you'll see segment-specific resources. So these are resources that are specifically curated for community college students. There's a CalFresh outreach response online social media sort of kit you could use if you want to blast out some of those new changes to CalFresh. There's Chancellor's Office updates that gets updated almost every single day. Our Wellness Central is a great resource for health and mental health online resources. And then the CSU has also updated a lot of their resources from their Chancellor's Office that are specific to CSU students. And then the UC has put in links to each of their living basic needs resources. So you'll just click on whichever campus you're looking for, and it will take you to a whole other document that's very similar to this one, a resource document that shares all sorts of resources specific to that campus or that community. And then down here at the bottom is a couple other additional resources that didn't quite fit in any of those categories. And like I mentioned before, this is an ongoing sort of resource guide. We're excited to share it with you. And also, if you have resources that you would like to be added on here. If you see something that's missing or something that maybe we forgot to include, please email that to us. And we will be happy to put it into the correct category that it sort of would fit into. So I'm going to pass it back over to Ruben here, and we'll move on with our Q&A.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Jessica, for being our lead in designing that and bringing everything together. We want to affirm to everybody that is here with us and the folks that are going to watch after the fact, we are an interdependent and emergent effort. So we're excited to continue to learn with each other and do better as we learn how to do better, and to keep this resource guide as up to date as possible with the collective brain trust of all of this community that you're seeing on camera, that is not on camera, and that is part of this effort. So thank you so much for that. We're going to move right along into our Q&A session. Thank you all so much for all of the brilliant and powerful questions that you all offered as you registered for this webinar. We're also keeping a garden where we're planting all of the questions that are coming in real time for this webinar in and of itself that we look forward to answering. I'm going to go ahead and check my mic and pass it over to Colleen, who's going to facilitate our Q&A session that'll bring us home. Thank you for facilitating, Colleen. The mic is yours.
Sure thing. Thank you, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We know everybody is really, really busy, but it's wonderful for us to have this time together with these incredibly smart folks that have real-time information to share with us. I'm going to go through a list of questions. Our first question was going to be for Crystal, and the question is, what support is coming from, I'm Colleen, I'm from the California Community College Chancellor's Office, just in case I should mention that. Our first question was, what support is coming from the federal level for next academic year, and how can we support those advocacy efforts? I think Crystal did touch a little bit on this question in her presentation, though we will be updating a more current response to this question in the resource guide once additional information becomes available. I think as Crystal had to check out, she's on East Coast time, so she had to check out. Debbie, this is a question for you. How can we make sure we are providing the limited resources we have to the students with the highest need? And this is actually a question that I've received across our system from multiple folks. So Debbie, I'm not sure if you have some feedback on that question.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of thoughts about that question. I think it's a really important one, and I'm actually really glad to hear that you're getting it from a bunch of different corners of the state. One thing that I think is something that's really important to recognize about our financial aid system, and this goes for our state Cal grants and our federal Pell grants, and basically every financial aid program we have. We are right now in the 2019-20 academic year. And so students who are getting financial aid generally filled out of FAFSA or the CADA in California. Those applications use family income from 2017 to assess students' eligibility for a Pell Grant or a Cal Grant. So when we talk about need and the level of resources students have, we're really looking at the level of resources they had in 2017, and we're using that as an estimate for their ability to pay for college right now. And I think that's an important piece to recognize as we think about this environment in particular. It's very fair to say that people who had a lot of needs in 2017 have them now too, because those are probably some of the families that were least well equipped to survive and get through this crisis intact. However, we can't necessarily be sure. There's a lot of families certainly that are struggling right now that might not have been struggling so much in 2017. So I think when colleges are thinking about how to tailor their efforts and how to spend their own CARES dollars, I think it's important to provide multiple paths towards eligibility. I particularly like what the CSU system is doing, where they're providing some money automatically to some of what they see as their highest needs students, but also have another route for applicants to come to them and say, I have needs too.
Wonderful, thank you. And Jessica B., this is a question for you. How can community-based organizations and coalitions better support college students? Oh, do we have Jessica B. back on? Oh,
yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry, you guys. I fell off the computer before. My computer gets hot and it decides to just shut down. So I apologize, and thank you to Andrew for filling in at the end of my presentation. We've done a lot of these together, so he knew what I was going to say. With regard, and hi, Colleen. Thanks for the question. With regards to what community-based organizations can be doing to help college students right now, you know, I think one of the things I've seen out there that's been really inspiring is these basic needs communities that have been coming together, you know, throughout the last couple of years haven't disappeared during this time period. In fact, you can see they've gotten stronger. I've gone on to various basic needs kind of websites at the different colleges where people are pulling together online resources. Those are great. I see you guys out there. It's amazing what you're doing for your fellow colleagues. So stick together, first and foremost. Stick together if you're part of that college basic need community. If you're not part of the college basic need community, but you're part of the broader community around a college, whether it's a community college, CSU or UC, reach out to those basic needs communities that have been developed. Their resource, they're available to hear from you, to see what you might have in the community. One of the things I think is going to be kind of the most challenging is how to get these funds that are available for undocumented Californians to students and their families, and making sure that that happens, and also making sure that when a person is eligible for the federal tax refund, especially young people leaving their homes. If their homes are headed by an adult who's undocumented and didn't file taxes, that young adult who's in college or just started college or is going to start college might be eligible for that already if they're the right age. So trying to get that information out is going to be really important, as well as the pandemic EBT. This is something we've never done before. People will get things in the mail that they don't know what to do with. And so just getting the word out and letting people know what to do with that pandemic EBT card will be really important. And then, as you heard Andrew say in his presentation, look, there's going to be a lot more people eligible for CalFresh. For the first time, many students who've lost work are going to be eligible for unemployment. Let's help use this toolkit, get it out, make sure that people know how to get the federal resources available to them. And last and finally, let's advocate for the federal policy changes that we need. We need a change to the student rule in the SNAP program, either through the pandemic college hunger bill or introduced by the chairwoman of the subcommittee on nutrition, Representative Fudge, or Gomez, Panetta, and Harder bill on the emergency eats. We need to get that passed. College, anything you can do to put your, let your representative Congress know that it needs to be passed, along with a strong CARES 2 Act that gives money to state, local governments, including higher ed.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for clarifying that the student work rule is still the student work rule, and the waiver was denied, that it was fixed for ABODs but not for students.
That's right.
Andrew has the next question. How can California community colleges, California state universities, and the University of California colleges leverage its collective buying power with association of food banks and grocery stores?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. And as far as that, buying power goes, I'm really glad people are thinking this way, because the food system has really been disrupted. Mm-hmm. Many of you probably know it very well firsthand. And those of us who can afford to shop are buying food from grocery stores or other retailers. And obviously we've spent most of this time focusing on those who can't. But hardly anyone is buying from restaurants or the food service sector. And so there's been just very serious issues with food being lost or going to waste, trying to get it to food banks, to schools, to places where, we can at least try and make sure that it's going to those in need, especially during this time. I think some of you know, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page, that a lot of these decisions are really determined locally. Mm-hmm. So again, please contact your food bank, or if you need better contacts, get in touch with me. But I can say this as a generalization, that what is needed most right now are shelf stable, just the basics right now: rice and beans and pasta and peanut butter. Thankfully, in the state of California, we get a lot of fresh produce. Again, if that's not happening locally, let's try and figure that out. There's been a lot of disruption, but we are really hopeful that we can work with the state of California to ensure that there's no disruption to the flow of food. For the first time since I've been doing this, food banks need food, that there's very important issues in trying to get more of that food, and we're trying to figure all of that out kind of in real time because things have been so disrupted. And so the state funding that we've gotten is helping produce boxes of food that provide just those kinds of shelf-stable items that supplement the fresh produce that California food banks are by and large getting. And if anyone's interested in that, we'd love to partner with you on that so that we're providing complete nutrition, rounded, grocery bags of everything that students and their families need to get by.
And our final question is for Shahera. Where should we direct students without housing when our college and university do not have housing?
Yeah, so one thing I would say is that if you aren't already connected to the homeless liaison on your campus, that might be a really good first point, because that's probably somebody who's already been looking into what the community resources are around housing. If you don't know that person, or you are that person, calling 211 to talk about kind of like the specific scenario that you're in or that your student is in, to see what resources might be available. So in most communities, I mentioned we have a continuum of care or coordinated entry. So there's supposed to be like a no wrong door approach. And sometimes 211 is the way to get to that sort of front door into the coordinated entry of the homelessness services system. I would also advocate right now for, if you have unrestricted funds or funds to be spending for students with basic needs crises, to see if you can get them into hotel rooms, and helping to make that connection for them or with them is a really good harm reduction strategy right now. I also just wanted to point out that, lending our voices to, the moratorium on evictions and the movement kind of around canceling rent right now is super, super important. And I just wanted to mention that so many of our students are couch surfing or living doubled up or tripled up, and don't necessarily have housing rights. And so that means they can be kicked out or displaced onto the streets. So just staying in close contact with those students that might be disproportionately impacted is going to be a good strategy right now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shahera. I do want to recognize that we've gotten a ton of questions in our Q&A box. It is unfortunate that we're running out of time, but we do promise to follow up in our resource guide with responses to all of the questions that you guys have presented. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to do a shout out to CCCs. I know I'm naughty, I shouldn't do it because we're CHEBNA, but keep going, CCCs. I'm going to pass it back to Ruben. Sorry, couldn't help it. I'm going to pass it back to Ruben, who's going to close us out for the day.
Thank you for that. And shout outs are always welcome, always. So shout out to community college, shout out to CSU, shout out to UC, shout out to everybody that's outside our segments, but is committed to our students. Shout out to all the mamas, because it was recently Mother's Day. So either you birthed or you raised, or you consider yourself a mama in whatever shape or form that means to you. Shout out to you, because we literally would not be here without you all. So thank you all so much for joining us for our first CHEBNA webinar. A lot of abundant lessons. We're excited to continue to improve our CHEBNA circle and our processes. We're going to keep you all up to date with our moves. Please make sure to add our resource guide to your toolbox. We're going to be sending you an email to the link of this recording. It will also have the webinar slides. It will also have the resource guide direct link to that. All of those gifts are coming to you all at no cost, because we don't believe in charging our people, and we got to take care of each other in that way. Final reminders, fam, you are not alone. We are in an abundant and powerful village. I cannot say that enough. Please make sure to move at the pace of your wellness and values. And if you needed GIFs for this week, here's a gift that reminds you to not stop, to don't give up, to keep trying. This is a shout out to Michelle Obama for launching the Becoming, documentary on Netflix. So there's a little gift there, because we are always stronger together. And the last thing, as always, Isang Baksak, which is if one of us falls, we all fall. And that means that when one of us rises, we all rise together. So please join me in saying thank you to all of our panelists and our CHEBNA Circle and panelists. Please join me in clapping, snapping, celebrating all of our community that was here with us. I think we had over 260 people here, and we had over 310 people register. This is just the beginning, fam. Thank you all so much. Take care of yourselves and be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Beautiful job, guys.
Good job, everyone.